the section that I give is titled Genesis and the Big Bang. It's my first book. And it has to do with, obviously, Genesis and the Big Bang, the idea of science and the Torah, or the science, whether they conflict or whether they match. And in doing this attempt to see where there are possibilities of confluence, where it seems conflict, I only use ancient biblical commentary, no modern biblical commentary, because all modern commentators on the science aspect for the Bible, as we led the science, always bending the Bible to match the science, bending the science to match the Bible. So the sources that I would use would be the biblical text itself, which dates itself over many thousands of years ago, and the biblical text. Then the major commentaries on this would be the Talmud, written down in the year 400, so it's 1600 years old, and the early part of the Talmud, the Talmud is in two parts, the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah is 1800 years old, so I mean, we're talking about ancient texts way before modern science was making predictions about dinosaurs, etc. And then the major commentators after would be Rashi. I know what the backgrounds are, so Rashi, if everybody knows any Rashi, the major commentator here, 1090, Maimonides, the 1190, 100 years later, the philosopher, theologian. And then the Kabbalah is brought by the Ramban, Nachmanides, and the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is not mysticism, Kabbalah is how God runs the world. And the idea for looking for deeper information within the text is as old as the biblical text itself. In Proverb number 8, the great proverb, Mishlei, Proverb 8, Proverb 25, 25 verse 11. A word well spoken is like apples of gold in a dish of silver. A word well spoken is like apples of gold in a dish of silver. And Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, says, what was King Solomon talking about? Now, the Proverbs goes back about 2,500 years. Why should a well-spoken word be like an apple of gold in a silver dish? Again, Proverb 25 verse 11. A word well spoken is like an apple of gold, or apples of gold in a dish of silver. Maimonides says like this: when you look at a dish from a distance, you see the beautiful silver dish. At a distance, that's all you can see, is the beautiful silver dish, the craftsmanship. But you can't see what's inside the dish. Only when you bring the dish close in, you discover the apples of gold. What's the silver dish? The literal text of the Torah. Frontal teaching, do this, don't do that, act this way, don't act that way. The apples of gold, the subtleties in the text. Why one word is spelled differently when it's used in a different context, or which words are chosen. And Maimonides writes that the text is interesting because apples of gold in a dish of silver, and not apples of silver in a dish of gold. And Maimonides says that gold is more beautiful, more valuable than silver. But the deeper meanings take the text way beyond the silver dish reading. The silver dish reading tells you how you run your life. Eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that. The golden apple is how God runs the world. It's essentially the Kabbalah. It's the hypertext. My wife is Barbara Stover, and she says every word in the Torah is hypertext. You know, as we go to you click on the word and get 14 pages of explanation of what the word means. That's what the Torah is like also. It's not put into the Bible. So to start, we'll handle questions or however we want to do it, but I'd like to start with one particular aspect of this possible conflict and confluence, and that's evolution. Okay? Evolution. And how evolution works or doesn't work relative to the understanding of the Torah. See, first of all, the Torah devotes for animal evolution, the development of animal life, a total of 6 sentences. In verse 20 of Genesis chapter 1, we're told that animal life, the waters teem with teams of living creatures. It's the first mention of animal life. And then in those following 6 sentences, we're told that the animal life from the water moves to the land, becomes mammalian, becomes human. That's all the Torah says about the development of life. Its flow is exactly correct. The first forms of animal life are found in the waters. It's called the Cambrian explosion of life. And that Cambrian explosion of life is so dramatic and so extraordinary that there are whole papers written about it. And I'm just going to show you one. I don't usually quote Time magazine, but the pictures the drawings are from the museums. And you'll notice this is evolution's Big Bang, the first big experience of animals that were visible. These are half a billion years ago, 530 million years ago approximately. They're in the waters, and it's exactly what Genesis chapter 1, verse 20 says, that the waters teem with teams of living creatures. The fossil record goes back for 3 billion years before this, but it takes a microscope to see any individual form of life. And then out of the blue comes this explosion of life with a menagerie of all the basic body plans that exist today. Not little people, but our body plan is called chordata. Bilaterally symmetrical, stereoscopic, stereophonic, internal skeleton. That describes us, it describes a dinosaur, a bird, doesn't describe a worm. That's a different body plan. Doesn't describe an insect, a different. Doesn't describe a mouse. There are all these different body plans, about 30 of them, 30, 34. And but they all explode into being. Now, there's no understanding how that happened. That's not just Bible talk. That's reality. We don't know how this happened because in Darwin's time, Charles Darwin's time, the fossil, this was known. This explosion was known, but it wasn't dated. But anything, all the rocks that were older, older fossils, the fossil record was empty. No one knew anything, it wasn't known. And it was only later, and that's the good news. Because when there's nothing found, you can say, well, you're looking over here, you silly people, look over there, and you'll get the little ones coming up. But now the fossil record is complete. Not complete, but continuous, put it that way. Going all the way back to the microbial life, and for 3 billion years, life requires a microscope to see any individual form of life. Then out of the blue explodes this form of life. And I have one sample, I have one example from this flow of life. And then we're going to get into meanings of different words. And that example is here. This sample, this animal right here. This is over 500 million years old. Realize before this, it required a microscope to see something. The origin of this, for me, is interesting. It's this animal here. The perfect ones are in the museums. They have limbs, limbs. But what's most amazing of all of this particular fossil, it has 2 of these things, which all of us have also. You think where those are? I don't know, that and that. This. What? Eyes. Every form of life that today, every body plan that has image-forming vision, there are 3. There's us, chordata. There's mollusks, and there are insects. Other forms of life can sense light. Other forms are like worms, but they don't have image-forming vision. The 3 phyla that have image-forming vision enter the fossil record with eyes. Does it prove there's a God? Absolutely not. Does it prove we don't understand evolution? And that might prove there's a God. Yes. We have no idea how this happened. It doesn't prove there's a God. Be careful when people say, well, that proves there's a God. If you could prove God absolutely, that'd be bad news, because you would lose your free will. The name of the game is how you run your life, how you choose. So there's always, God works through nature constantly to make the world look natural. But just quickly, how I got this fossil, because it is interesting the impact that some of these things have on persons. This goes back several decades. I was giving a talk in Houston, Texas, at the entrance to NASA. I've done really, some modesty, a micro amount of work for NASA. My background is in nuclear physics. And I gave this talk, and it went on for a few hours. Don't worry, we're not getting stuck into that. And this guy comes up to me after we talked about these, and we talked about the age of the universe, which we're going to get into in a moment. This man comes up to me, tears streaming down his face, in front of his peers. We're talking about, we're right outside the door. We actually had some people from mission control, and at least one astronaut who identified himself afterwards. This man comes up, tears streaming down his face. He said, "You changed my life tonight. You changed my life." He said, "I'm a devout Christian. I work at NASA all week long. It's 100 billion light years, billions of light years. And I go to church on Sunday, and in 6 days, for the first time in my life, I can see they work together. It changed my life, and I'm so beholden to you that we talked about the Cambrian explosions. My son has 2 fossils from the Cambrian explosion, and I'm going to give you one of them." At which point the kid said, "Daddy, don't." And I said, "Shut up." That's this fossil. It's pretty amazing. I mean, just think about it. Microscopic, 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 and then out of the blue. becomes the extreme. So, anyway, but it means we don't understand the development of life. But now let's just talk more generally from the things back in my socks. Right, as the dinosaur fossils also keeping the black socks. So, I want to talk about evolution, and I would like to talk a bit about these billions of years, okay? Unless there are other questions, but those are often two of the basic questions. Evolution is an interesting statement. That life started simply and developed over time and became more complex. I hope it's true, because if it's not true, then the Bible's wrong. But the Torah says explicitly. As I said before, life starts in the waters, moves to the land, becomes mammal, becomes human. That's all the text says. The fossil record says it in 1 million samples. The Bible says it in 6 sentences. Okay, starting in chapter 5. It starts in verse 20. By verse 26, we have Adam, which then would be 7 sentences. But one of the sentences, there was evening and morning, a 5th day. So there are only 6 functional sentences. We got millions of samples showing the development. But what the development of this flow, this fossil record doesn't say how it happened. So that's why I want to get to 2 kinds of words. That life developed from the simple to the complex, I think is absolutely true. What drove the development is the question. Did it happen by randomness or not? Now, if you use the word evolution, then you've taken a theological stance. And eventually, I say this every time I give this session, I hope someday there will be a guy or gal in the session who's either a high-powered lawyer or will have a parent who's a high-powered lawyer and take it to the courts, because it is forbidden to teach theology in a science classroom in a school that is funded by public funds. You can teach anything you want in a private school. And the word evolution should be stricken from the textbooks, because evolution is a theological statement. Evolution says that life changes how? The flow of life? Random mutations, with the emphasis on the random. The mutations have to be random. If you're using the word, it can be sloppy in the use of the words. But as the late Rosh Yeshiva, the founder of Aish Torah, magnificent human being. Now, Noah Weinberg, if you ever had the chance of meeting him, you can listen to his tapes, and that is only half of what he was. Phenomenal human being. Noah, he said, if you're going to have a discussion, the first thing you have to do is define your terms. Words have meanings. The word evolution has a strict meaning. You can be sloppy, then life evolved. But if you use the word evolution as textbooks use it, it's a 2-stage process. The first stage is random mutations. Get the word random? Random mutations make, in the sex line of course, make some progenies, some of the children progenies stronger, some weaker. Make some baby lions stronger and some baby lions weaker. But the mutations have to be random if you use the word evolution, unless you're sloppy with your language. And then the second stage of evolution is 100% not random. Strong lions eat weak lions. The fact that there are not a lot of lions in the world today isn't because of hunters. There are not a lot of lions in the world today because lions eat lions. If you don't realize, that's the way it is in the world. And the baby cheetah that are born faster than the baby cheetah that are born slower because of mutations. Well, fast cheetah get more food than slow cheetah, so guess who has more kids? The fast cheetah, because it got more food. So the second stage of evolution is 100% not random. Strong lions kill weak lions, and fast cheetah get more food than slow cheetah. But the first stage, to use the word evolution, has to be random. Or it's not the word evolution, it's development. And that's the subtle difference. Textbooks should say exactly the case, that life developed from the simple to the complex, which is true for the Bible, and it's true for science, but it's neutral. The word development does not say yes God or no God. And the reason I talk about having a high-powered lawyer could take this to the courts and get the word evolution stricken from the textbooks, or at least have a definition of what it means. Because evolution is a theological statement, and it should be forbidden in the classrooms. Evolution is a theological statement. It says God is not active in the world, it's random. It's a negative theological statement, but it's theology. And that should be forbidden, to say that God is not. It could be either. Whereas development, I said, is neutral. Is it God or is it not God? Is it random or is it the divine? The nuances that make the mutations occur. I would say, look at the Bible, it's probably a mix of both. But to say that it's evolution is completely wrong. You put, as any evolutionist, are the mutations random? And he will not be able to say yes or no, because no one knows. He knows the mutations happen, and the mutations in the genes make one type better than another. So I'm going to give just two examples of how information is skewed. How information is skewed when you get it at times in popular science literature. Okay. So anyway, those are the two differences. One is neutral, and one is a theological statement. That mutations occur, for sure. I mean, just look around, at life even now, we know mutations occur. God forbid, sometimes they cause horrendous diseases, and sometimes they make, you don't look like your mom or your dad. You look like a mix of your mom or your dad, or maybe you look like your great-grandparent or something or other. This is an article from a journal called The New Scientist. The New Scientist is not peer-reviewed, but it is an accepted, serious scientific journal. And it's talking about the humanity switch. And the humanity switch is the following. That if you look at the flow of the shape of skulls over time, okay, we have a chipped skull here, and gradually over time, we get a human-shaped skull. Now that's important because there's the high forehead here. Because the high forehead is where all your logic is. That's where you are, right up here. That's it. You realize that everything, every bit of you is from your head. Since many of you are wearing sandals, when you always wiggle your toes, and in a cold weather I can't see it. You're wiggling? I can't see it. Wiggling? Where do you feel your toes? Where do you feel your toes? What? Say it. Where? In your brain. Only. Toes feel nothing. No, only in your brain. Nothing feels anything but your brain. The toes pick up the information, sends it up here. If you don't think that's the case, God forbid a person loses a limb, like an arm, God forbid, or a toe, they still feel it, right? Because the brain still has that information. Toes feel nothing. It's all in your brain. It's quiet. In every brain, you have at least six body plans, or 6 plans of your bodies, maps. Upside down and backwards. Why upside down and backwards? Because the light is all based on how light comes in your eye, which is the lens, which turns the image upside down. None of you look like you're standing on your head. But in my brain, and you're all in your head, and your brain, I'm on my head. Because that's the way the brain works. But it's all in your head. From here up is you. The rest of it is just keep it going. Okay? So that's the importance of this high forehead. It gives you this big logic area. So this is the humanity switch. And it's a very interesting article, and it goes along and it even diagrams what happens. Now this is not talking about the whole body, only the shape of the skull. The shape of the skull mirrors the shape of the brain inside the skull. Hence chimps have a very low skull. I mean, I'm not talking chimpanzees, but they're not people. They don't have that much logic. So what's the diagram that's shown here? Because it's extremely interesting. To me, at least, it may be boring to people. Here's a flow, and here you have people up here. Okay? This is the diagram that's here. There's a piece of information back here, and that's crucial. Remember, let that sink in. There's a piece of information in the genome, the genes, that has certain kind of information. And about this point right here, chimps branch off. We know we have a common ancestor because anyone know what percentage of our genes, of our genetic information is chimpanzee? 98%. Between 98 and 99%. Which explains the newspaper headlines pretty clearly. But that's reality. I mean, that's not debatable. Those data are data. I mean, you think all of it's wrong, but most of it's, except that our doctor treats us, so in fact, the relationship is also the science finds us. Now, what happens is this gene that is already present, and this is about 5 million years ago, and it works very nicely with the genes and also with the Afro-Southern River. We're not going to get into the origin of Adam today, except for a few sentences, but that's about 5 million years ago. And then suddenly, suddenly, this gene doubles itself, which is very rare, and you get another split off here, and that's about 2.5 million years ago. Million now, that means 6 years. Everybody's familiar with that, right? Once I had a session, they first in this way. It's not 106, but 10. So one with 6 years. And then the gene multiplies itself again, and you end up with a head-shaped people. What's very interesting is, this is very rare, that a gene doubles itself and doubles itself again. But that's what this diagram says, what this article says. And it changed the chimp-type brain into a human brain. So those are the data. Remember, the information was already present, waiting in the wings. The article doesn't bother talking about that, but that's pretty crucial. The information was already there genetically. It just had to be brought online. And then, so is it pre-programmed? I'm not going to say yes or no. I really want to, I'm not trying to prove he's a God. But it's intriguing to look at some of these nuances. But then the article has its summary, okay? And here is the summary of the article, which the average bloke on the street reads this. He doesn't have time to read the whole article, he just reads the summary. And here's the summary article. One paragraph. The essence of humanity, because this is what we are. This stuff up here is what makes us. The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of random mutations, every one of them happening by chance. You hear that? That's what the article says. The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of random mutations, every one of them happening by chance. Really? That's what this says? It says nothing of the sort. It says the mutations happen. But notice how it's skewed when you read the information. That's what textbooks are skewed also. The actual essence of humanity, the sheriff said the following. The essence of humanity largely boils down to a bunch of mutations. That's true. But random, chance, there are no data whatsoever, zero, that support that they're random. And if you ask if you're forced under oath to make an evolutionist, how secular they are, to say that under oath that they would have to say that they're random, they can't, because there are no data to show they're random. Well, they will say that why wasn't it perfect? The biblical God doesn't expect a perfect God, a perfect world. The biblical God knows his problems. How do we see that? Not in the 6 days of Genesis almost. There's only 31 sentences. So there's almost no information. But after, do we see places where the world, I'm not going to call it evolution now, but just this flow. Do we see that the flow is direct and straight? No. By chapter 6, what happens? The flood. God says, oy vey, what a mess. I'm going to press the reset button. Nowhere does the Bible text expect that the world is perfect divinely. God resets the world. Before the flood, people were living to 900 years. It was a bad idea, God said. Try sequence number 2, plan number 2. Make it 90 years. And lifespans drop to 90 years. Okay? So the fact is that let's say, an evolutionist might say, well, if there's really a God, why isn't it all straight? That's lovely for his concept her concept of a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah God. But the God of the Bible is very different from the bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah. The God of the Bible expects problems. One other thing about how information is presented, not now in a science journal, but in the popular press, the New York Times, International Journal of Chemical Engineering, the New York Times. Okay? Here it is. It's amazing. These dummies that don't think evolution. Here it is right here. It's in there right here. Tibetans cited as recent case of evolutionary change. 1, 2, 3, 4 columns wide. On page number 2. Not page 5 where the garbage is. It's in the garbage already. They want to get a point across. They didn't waste any. It's half the second page of the New York Times. Tibetans cited as recent case of evolutionary change. Wow, they really proved evolution here. And it's just amazing. And it was published in the journal Science. So now science is one of the many guys in the sciences at all? Sure. So science is one of the leading journals. My background's MIT. So back at MIT I published regularly in science. So that's published in the States, Nature, in the British Isles, the 2 tops of the mountains. So when you're quoting an article from Science, you know the data are not skewed, okay? You don't get past peer review. It's a peer-reviewed journal. So what's the amazing thing that proves evolution? Well, here it is right here. It's obvious. They were wondering, the scientists, the authors of the journal, were wondering how it can be that Tibetans live at 14,000 feet. You know, what don't you have in the air at 14,000 feet? A lot of what? Oxygen. I mean, at the end of the day, they can barely breathe. But these guys and gals are thriving up there. I mean, this is just amazing. So they wanted to figure out how it can happen. So these guys, they probably put on oxygen anyway, they go 14,000 feet, and they take a very large sampling of people living up there, and they define not that there's more hemoglobin, like hemoglobin is what makes your blood red, it's the part that catches the oxygen, okay? They didn't have more hemoglobin, the hemoglobin had a mutation. That mutation made it almost like a vacuum cleaner. I mean, it just was like proactive. It just grabbed the oxygen, so they could thrive. And they did a study of the number of people, they did a very large sampling, and they found out that 87% of the Tibetans living up in the mountain had this mutation. And that's pretty amazing. 87, it's almost everyone, 87% of the mutation. But to get published in Science, that's not enough. Let's do a background study. So the Tibetans really aren't Tibetans, you should realize that. They're really Han Chinese. I mean, that's part of the logic that China says it really should own Tibet. I mean, it's ridiculous. The Han Chinese moved up there 3,000 years ago. I mean, so they're like saying the Americans really, I know Saxons, who was around England 3,000 years ago, I mean, it's almost the time of Abraham. You know, so, but they call them Tibetans, okay? But the Tibetans are Han Chinese, their origin, from the Beijing area. So what do? You go down to the Beijing area, and you study the Han Chinese living down there. And they discovered the same mutation at 9% abundance. Because you don't want this mutation, it kills you after your early childbearing years. You rotate to the early childbearing years, but then you die earlier than you would have. So you don't want it. So at sea level, it's useless. It doesn't kill you right away. You have some kids, but not like it. But not, you really would rather not have it. Now the origin of this mutation dates way before the 3,000 years. You can see that right there as a mutation. So we're not talking about the origin of the mutation. But now let's go back 3,000 years, okay? 3,000 years. There's a bunch of families living, you know, the Han Chinese are all living down there in the Beijing area. Their life is not so good, bad this way, the other way. And they decide, 100 families decide they're going to get out of that life fighting, they're going to go up to the mountains. So if it's 9% abundant, how many of the 100 families will have that mutation? It's not a trick question. There's 100 families and it's 9% abundant at sea level. This is 3,000 years ago. How many of the families will have that mutation? 9 will have it. How many won't have it? 91. Now at the end of the day, how are they feeling? The 9% that have the mutation, how are they feeling? Great, honey. Oh, big. What if the 91% was big? That's what for Charles. But there's a difference. The difference is, at the end of the day, the guys and gals with the mutation say let's have as many kids as we can have, because women were just made for this climate. The 91 that say, "Oh, I can't stand this. Why did you come up in the first place?" And so gradually, over those 3,000 years, the 9% becomes 87%. Because the guys and gals that have kids with mutation, their kids have a mutation also. So they thrive also. And gradually, over time, the 9% becomes 87%. Wait another 1,000 years, it'll be 95%. Is that evolution? What? Okay. What's your name? Jenny. It's adaptation. Why, Jenny? Well, why is, you see, it's adaptation. It's not evolution. Why is it adaptation? Because the information is already... Exactly. The information was already there. The climate changed, or they changed it by moving, and now that which was diminutive and not perfect for this use becomes dominant. It's adaptation. So why does the text say evolution? Now I go back to the science journal, and guess what word isn't the major driving force of the science journal? Evolution. It's adaptation. It adapted. The information was already there. Evolution would require that the guys and gals move up there, and the mutation takes place up there, and then that's what makes, but that's not what happened. There's no mutation taking place now. That mutation is back in the hinterlands of time. The information was already there. So why does the newspaper change it, the chutzpah, to say evolution? You know what? Because evolution sells newspaper. I mean, it'd be totally uninteresting. Tibetan side is adaptation. Who cares about adaptation? I want evolution to prove that the Bible is wrong. That's the thrust of this article. But evolution isn't what happened. Adaptation is what happened. But adaptation doesn't sell newspapers. And like it or not, the business of a newspaper is one-fold, primarily of you, selling newspapers. And that the news is good is secondary. To stay in business, they have to sell newspapers. And the more copies they sell, the more advertisers pay to have their picture in that newspaper. And adaptation doesn't sell more copies. Evolution does. And so they changed the word from adaptation to evolution. Be careful when you're reading texts about what you get. And one of the major texts that was changed, was Darwin's Origin of Species. Anybody know when the Origin of Species was published? 1859. That was one of the early, one of the first books. There's other discussions of it, but Darwin put it into words and very nicely put together. So Darwin is often, it's my second book besides God. So Darwin is often quoted in an interesting way. Now I'm going to read the quote from the most widely read science journal in the world. I've repeated it here, Scientific American. also as quoted by a person by the name of Stephen Jay Gould, a Jewish, needless to say, professor of paleobiology at Harvard University. He said he was a Levite, his parents served the temple. And Gould also is a person that would quote Darwin. And here's how he's put on Scientific American, the most widely read science journal in the world, and I factor of 10 easily. It's not peer reviewed. Here it is. Here's the closing paragraph of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, the first of the book's major evolution. There's a grandeur in this view of life. There's a grandeur in this view of life. While this planet has gone on cycling according to the fixed laws of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful, most wonderful have been or are being evolved. Just going to read the opening sentence again. There's a grandeur in this view of life, while the planet's gone cycling, life evolved. That's the Scientific American, according to Charles Darwin. That's Gould in the Journal of Natural History from the Smithsonian Institute, and of course the Museum of Natural Sciences in New York. But here's the closing sentence of Darwin by Darwin. Again, I'm going to read the Scientific American. There's a grandeur in this view of life, while the planet's gone cycling, life evolved. Here's Darwin on Darwin. There's a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms of one, and while the planet has gone on cycling, life evolved. Notice the difference? When you read Darwin, what's left out? With its several powers having been originally breathed by the Creator into a few forms of one. Now, why would that be? Because journals have a vested interest. Get God out of the classroom. That's the goal. Get God out of the science class. The simple fact is, it's not evolution, it's adaptation, and those definitions, they don't have a clue if they're random or not. So when you're hearing about evolution, always ask your professor, are you talking about evolution or development? Are the mutations random? Show me they're random. You cannot, and there's not an evolutionist in the world that can show that they're random. They might be random, or they might be God. But that's the difference between the use of the word development, which is neutral, and evolution, which is theologically negative. So much for that man-based thing on evolution, but it's important to see the difference.